The air in the cantina was thick with smoke and the smell of alien drinks. Strange creatures from dozens of worlds sat at small tables, talking in low voices about trade deals and shipping routes. In the darkest corner of the room, Commander Zektar sat alone with his drink. His forearms moved slowly as he lifted the glass to his mouth. The blue liquid inside tasted bitter, but not as bitter as his memories. Scars covered his thick shell-like skin, telling stories of battles fought across the galaxy, but the deepest wounds were the ones nobody could see. Zektar had fought in the Great War against the humans 3 years ago, the war that changed everything. The war that taught his people what real fear meant. A young female Catharian walked across the room toward his table. Her name was Velos, and she worked for the Galactic News Network. She had heard stories about the famous commander and wanted to interview him for her documentary about the war. "Commander Zektar," she said. "Softly, my name is Velos. I write stories about the war for people to remember. Would you talk to me about what happened?" Zektar looked up at her with his large black eyes. He did not speak for a long time. Finally, he pointed to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down," he said. "Dad, I do not think you will like what I have to say." Loss sat down and pulled out her recording device. "I want to know the truth about the humans. Our government says we won many battles. They say the war ended because both sides were tired. But soldiers who came back tell different stories." Zektar laughed. "But it was not a happy sound. Your government lies. We did not win battles against the humans. We survived them. There is a big difference." He drank more of his bitter liquid and stared at the wall. "You want to know about humans? I will tell you. But first, let me ask you something. What do you know about death?" Velos looked confused. "Death. It is the end of life. All creatures fear it. We fight to avoid it." "That is what we thought too," Zektar said. "That's why we lost." The commander ordered another drink and began his story. "We had the best weapons, the best soldiers, the best everything. Our leaders told us the humans were a young race. They had only been flying between stars for a few hundred years. We had been doing it for thousands." He paused and looked directly at Velos. "We thought it would be easy. The first battle was at a place called Kepler Station," he continued. "It was a human space station near the edge of their territory. Our spy ships told us it had weak defenses and only a few human warships protecting it." Zektar's voice became quieter. "We jumped out of hyperspace with 50 ships. The humans had maybe 15? Our computers calculated that we would win in less than an hour with minimal losses." "What happened?" Velos asked, leaning forward. "The human admiral was named Jake Morrison. He commanded their ships from a big carrier called Liberty's Edge. When we appeared, our communication officer tried to contact them to demand their surrender. You know what the human said?" Velos shook her head. Said, "Thanks for coming to the party. Hope you brought enough ships." Then he laughed. He actually laughed. The old commander drank again and continued. "We thought he was crazy. Our fleet had more ships, bigger guns, stronger shields. Any smart commander would have tried to run away or ask for terms. But Morrison did something that still gives me nightmares. He ordered his ships to attack us directly, not careful attacks from long range like we expected. Full speed, straight at our biggest ships. His fighter pilots flew their small ships right into our gun positions. They did not try to escape when their ships were damaged. They used their damaged ships as weapons. Zektar's forehands were shaking now. I watched human pilots crash their broken fighters into our gun turrets. They knew they would die, but they kept coming. One pilot, I remember his ship was on fire and half destroyed. He could have ejected and saved his life. Instead, he aimed his burning ship at our bridge and screamed something over the radio." "What did he scream?" Velos asked. "He screamed for Earth and crashed into our shield generator. The explosion killed him instantly, but it also knocked out our main defenses." The commander stared into his drink. "That was when I realized we were not fighting normal soldiers. Normal soldiers want to live. They fight to protect something, but they also want to go home to their families. These humans were different." "How were they different?" They fought like dying was just part of the job, like it did not scare them at all. Listen to their radio communications. You know what they talked about while they were being shot at? Velos waited for the answer. They made jokes. They laughed about close calls. One pilot named Tony was flying a damaged ship with only one engine working. His friends on the radio were making fun of him for being slow. He was probably going to die in the next few minutes, and they were all laughing about it. Zektar leaned back in his chair. The battle lasted 6 hours. We should have won in one. When it was over, we had lost 12 ships and thousands of soldiers. The humans lost most of their fleet too, but they acted like they had won the greatest victory in history. But you still controlled the space station, right? Velos asked. Yes, we took the station. But as we were boarding it, the human commander did something that haunts me to this day. He activated the station's self-destruct sequence. He was going to blow up the entire station with himself and his crew still inside. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. I ordered my boarding teams to move faster, to try to stop him. When my soldiers reached the command center, they found the human commander sitting calmly at his desk. His name was Captain Doug Peters. He looked at my soldiers and smiled. What did he say? He said, "You boys want this station? You can have it. Hope you enjoy the fireworks." Then he pressed the detonation button. Velos gasped. He killed himself. He tried to. My soldiers managed to stop the explosion with only seconds to spare, but that is not the point. The point is that he was willing to destroy everything rather than let us have it, and he smiled while he did it. Finished his drink and looked at the young reporter. That was our first battle with humans. We thought we had learned everything we needed to know about them. We were wrong. After that battle, I sent a report to High Command. I told them that humans were more dangerous than we thought. They fought like creatures who did not fear death. My superiors thought I was suffering from battle stress. They said I was imagining things. The commander stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. 3 years and dozens of battles later, I know I was not imagining anything. I know why we really stopped fighting the humans. And I know why veterans like me have trouble sleeping at night. Velos looked up at him. Will you tell me about the other battles? Zektar looked down at her for a long moment. Come back tomorrow night. I will tell you about the siege of Proxima 7. I will tell you about Captain Lisa Hayes and her Marines. I will tell you why we started having nightmares about human laughter. He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. But I warn you, young reporter, once you know the truth about humans, you will never see the galaxy the same way again. Some knowledge changes you forever. With that, the old commander walked out into the night, leaving Velos alone with her thoughts and the beginning of a story that would terrify the entire galaxy. The next night, Velos arrived at the cantina early. She had spent all day thinking about Commander Zektar's story from the night before. The young reporter could not stop imagining human soldiers who laughed while they died. It seemed impossible. But the old commander's eyes had shown no lies. Zektar was already sitting in the same dark corner, staring at his drink. He looked older tonight, more tired. When Velos sat down across from him, he did not look up right away. You came back, he said finally. I thought you might change your mind. I need to know more, Velos replied. What happened after Kepler? Station. The commander ordered another drink and began his story. High Command did not believe my reports about human behavior. They said the battle was just lucky for the humans. They ordered me to take my fleet to Proxima 7, a mining colony in human space. He took a long drink and continued. Proxima 7 was a small world with only one city. Maybe 50,000 humans lived there. We brought 3 full battle groups to attack it, that is about 30,000 Catharian soldiers against their tiny garrison. How many human soldiers were defending the colony? Velos asked. Intelligence said maybe 200 Marines and some civilian volunteers. The human commander was a woman named Captain Lisa Hayes. She had been a Marine for 15 years, but never commanded anything bigger than a company before. Zektar laughed bitterly. We thought it would be easy. Surround the colony, cut off their supplies, and wait for them to surrender. Standard siege tactics? It should have taken maybe a week. It did not work that way? No. The first strange thing happened on day 3 of the siege. My soldiers found something in the forest around the colony. Human bodies, but not what you would expect. The old commander's voice became quieter. The bodies were arranged in patterns, geometric shapes that served no military purpose. At first, we thought the humans were burying their dead in some religious ceremony. Then we realized the truth. What truth? Bodies were booby traps. Humans had taken their own dead soldiers and filled them with explosives. When my scouts went to investigate, the bodies exploded. Bellis felt sick to her stomach. They used their own dead as weapons? That was just the beginning. Over the next few days, we found more displays. Human corpses arranged to look like they were still alive, sitting at guard posts or manning weapons. Some had motion sensors that would trigger explosions when we got close. Others had speakers that would play recordings of human voices. Zektar drank more of his bitter liquid. The psychological effect on my soldiers was immediate. He started refusing to approach any human bodies, even ones that were clearly dead. Every corpse could be a trap. Did you report this to your commanders? I tried, but High Command said I was exaggerating again. He said no civilized species would desecrate their own dead like that. He ordered me to continue the siege. The commander stared at the wall. On day 7, something happened that changed everything. Sergeant Ben Crawford, one of the human Marines, sent us a message over open radio channels. What did he say? He said, "Hey, ugly bug faces, thanks for the target practice. My boys are getting bored shooting at rocks. Why don't you come closer so we can have some real fun?" Then he started laughing. His 4 hands clenched into fists. We had been bombarding their positions for a week. We had cut off their food and water. They should have been desperate, scared, ready to surrender. Instead, they were making jokes. What did you do? I ordered a direct assault on their outer defenses. 2 full battalions of my best soldiers. They should have overwhelmed the human. Positions in minutes. The old warrior paused for a long time. The humans had turned the entire colony into a death trap. They used mining equipment to dig tunnels under their own buildings. Would collapse them from below. But that would kill the humans too. That is what we thought. The humans had already moved to different positions. It abandoned their own buildings and let us walk into traps. Work. She had rigged every building in the colony to explode at the touch of a button. Zektar's voice became darker. The worst part was listening to their radio communications during the assault. My soldiers were dying in collapsed buildings. The humans were celebrating. They cheered every time they killed one of us. How could they be happy about killing? Is what I ask myself. Every other species in the galaxy treats killing as a necessary evil. Something you do because you have to, not because you want to. But these humans seem to enjoy it. The commander ordered another drink. Lieutenant Colonel Rick Thompson was their senior officer. I listened to him talking to his soldiers over the radio. He said, 17 of my people are dead, boys. Means we're just getting started. Let's show these bugs what real war looks like. He was happy that his own soldiers had died. Not happy, but not sad either. He talked about their deaths like they were payments toward a larger victory. Like every dead human soldier made the living ones more dangerous. Zektar leaned forward. On day 10 of the siege, we captured one. Of their supply convoys, 3 human soldiers were guarding it. Private Danny Sullivan, medic Kate Williams, and a young engineer named Pete Morris. What happened to them? We brought them back to our camp for questioning.
Standard procedure
is to separate prisoners and interrogate them individually. But these humans did something that surprised our interrogators. What? They started interrogating us. They asked questions about our equipment, our tactics, our home world. In fact, they seemed curious about us, like we were interesting specimens they wanted to study. The old commander shook his head. Private Sullivan actually asked one of our interrogators if he could examine a Catharian weapon. Said he was curious about the engineering. The medic, Williams, wanted to know about Catharian anatomy. She asked where our vital organs were located. They were gathering intelligence, even as prisoners. Yes, but it was more than that. They were genuinely interested in learning about us. Not because they were scared, but because they found us fascinating. Like they were already planning how to fight us better next time. Zektar's voice became very quiet. The engineer Morris told our interrogator something that still haunts me. The only good fight is a fair fight, but the only smart fight is an unfair one. Thanks for teaching us how you think. What did that mean? It meant they were learning from being captured, were turning their defeat into an advantage. Every piece of information they gathered about us would be used against us later. The commander stood up and walked to the window. The siege ended on day 14. Not because we won, but because Captain Hayes made a decision that terrified my entire command staff. What decision? She triggered a massive explosion that destroyed half the colony. She had rigged the main mining facility with enough explosives to level several city blocks. The explosion killed hundreds of civilians in 2 of my battalions. Gasped. She killed her own people. Yes, but before she did it, she sent one final message to my fleet. She said, "This is Captain Hayes to all Catherian forces. Welcome to human space. This is how we say goodbye." Then she started laughing. Zektar returned to his seat. The explosion was so large it could be seen from orbit. When the smoke cleared, we found something that broke the spirits of my soldiers.
What?
The surviving humans were celebrating? They had lost their homes, their friends, their entire colony. But they were acting like they had won the greatest victory in history. They were singing songs and making jokes about the explosion. Old Warrior finished his drink. That night, I sent another report to High Command. I told them that humans do not think like other species. Did they believe you this time? No. They said I was developing an irrational fear of humans. They ordered me to take my fleet to the next target. They said the war would be over soon. Zektar stood up to leave. But I knew the truth. We were not fighting soldiers who wanted to go home. We were fighting creatures who had found their true purpose in warfare itself. And that made them the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. He walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Tomorrow night I will tell you about Beta Centauri. I will tell you about Colonel Matt Davis and his regiment. I will tell you why my soldiers started refusing direct orders rather than fight humans in close combat. The old commander disappeared into the night, leaving Velis alone with the terrible knowledge that the war had been far worse than anyone had told her people. On the 3rd night, Velis arrived at the cantina to find Commander Zektar, already deep in his cups. The old warrior's forehand shook more than usual as he lifted his glass. His black eyes were distant, lost in memories that clearly still caused him pain. "You look terrible tonight," Velis said as she sat down. "Tonight I tell you about Beta Centauri," Zektar replied without looking at her. "Tonight I tell you about the day I learned that humans cannot be broken." The young reporter activated her recording device and waited. She had learned that pushing the old commander only made him drink more and talk less. "Beta Centauri was supposed to be our great victory," Zektar began. "High Command was tired of hearing my reports about strange human behavior. They sent me to attack a human military base with orders to show no mercy. They wanted me to crush the humans completely." He drank deeply before continuing. "The base was defended by 1 regiment of human soldiers, about 3,000 men and women under the command of Colonel Matt Davis. We brought 15,000 Catherian warriors and the most advanced weapons in our fleet." "That seems like overwhelming odds," Velis said. "It should have been. We surrounded the base completely. No supplies could get in, no messages could get out. We cut off their power, their water, their communication systems. Standard siege warfare. Says they should surrender in days." Zektar laughed bitterly. "The humans lasted 6 months. 6 months. How's that possible? Because humans do not follow the rules of warfare that every other species in the galaxy understands. When we cut off their water supply, they dug wells with their bare hands. We destroyed their food storage. They ate plants and insects they found around the base." The old commander's voice grew quieter. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was watching them get stronger as conditions got worse. Stronger? How could they get stronger? Ow. Do not know how to explain it properly. When my soldiers face hardship, they become weaker, slower, more likely to make mistakes. When humans face hardship, they become more focused, more creative, more dangerous. Zektar ordered another drink. After 1 month of siege, we captured some human supply drones that were trying to reach the base. The messages we found on them were not what we expected. What kind of messages? Letters from human families, but not letters begging their soldiers to come home safely. These families were encouraging their soldiers to fight harder. One letter from a human mother said, Make us proud, son. Show them what our family is made of. The commander shook his head in amazement. Another letter from a human father told his daughter, "Remember what I taught you about never giving up? I would rather have a dead hero for a daughter than a living coward. Their own families wanted them to die rather than surrender. That is what I thought at first. But then I realized it was something else. These families believed that dying in battle was better than living with shame. They valued honor more than life itself." Zektar stared into his drink. After 2 months, we started taking casualties from human raids. Small groups of soldiers would sneak out of the base at night and attack our supply lines. They never tried to escape. They would attack us, cause as much damage as possible, then fight to the death. Suicide missions. That is what we called them. But the humans did not see them that way. They saw them as hunting trips. Staff Sergeant Tony Garcia led many of these raids. We intercepted his communications with the base. He talked about hunting. Catharians like it was a sport. The old warrior's voice became darker. Garcia had been shot 7 times in various battles. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand and walked with a limp from shrapnel in his leg. Any rational soldier would have been evacuated to a medical facility, but he kept fighting, and he kept getting better at it. Wounds seemed to teach him something new. He learned to use his injuries as advantages. His limp made his movement patterns unpredictable. His missing fingers helped him grip certain weapons differently. Zektar leaned forward. After 3 months, we captured one of Garcia's men during a raid. A young private named Billy Chen, maybe 20 years old. We thought he would be easy to break. What happened? He told us about human military training. Said humans are taught from childhood that pain is temporary, but quitting lasts forever. He explained that every human soldier volunteers for military service. Nobody forces them to fight. The commander's forehands clenched into fists. He said something that still haunts me. He said, "You guys just don't understand. This is what we live for. This is when we're most alive." He enjoyed being in combat. More than enjoyed it, he said that peacetime made humans feel restless and bored. He said that war was when humans discovered who they really were. Fighting brought out their best qualities, not their worst ones. Zektar drank again before continuing. After 4 months, we started seeing behavior in the human soldiers that defied all military logic. Major Elena Vasquez was commanding a section of the base defense when an artillery shell destroyed both her legs. She was evacuated. No, she refused evacuation. She had her soldiers carry her to a command position where she could still coordinate defensive fire. She commanded her troops from a stretcher using binoculars to spot targets for her artillery teams. The old commander shook his head. Any Catharian officer would have been relieved of duty immediately. Wounded soldiers cannot think clearly or make good decisions. But Vasquez seemed to become more effective after she was injured. How is that possible? I think pain focused her mind somehow. She stopped worrying about her own safety and concentrated completely on hurting us. Her artillery strikes became more accurate after she was wounded, not less. Zektar stood up and walked to the window. After 5 months, we finally managed to capture some important prisoners. Lieutenant Alex Chen and Communications Officer Sandy Martinez were taken during a failed raid on our command post. Did you get useful information from them? That is what we hoped. But these prisoners were unlike any we had ever taken. They showed no fear at all. In fact, they seemed genuinely curious about us. The commander returned to his seat. Chen asked our interrogators about Catharian military organization. He wanted to know how our command structure worked, what our standard tactics were, how we made strategic decisions. He was gathering intelligence? Yes, but not in a desperate way. Ask questions like a student trying to learn from a teacher. He seemed fascinated by our methods. Martinez did the same thing. She asked about our communication systems, our equipment, our homeworld culture. Zektar's voice became very quiet. The strangest part was when our interrogator tried to threaten them. He told Chen that he would be executed if he did not cooperate. You know what the human said? Vela shook her head, said that's fine. Dying for my country is the greatest honor a soldier can have. I just hope I've caused enough trouble to make it worthwhile. Then he smiled. He smiled at the threat of execution. He smiled like someone had just told him good news. Martinez had the same reaction. When threatened with death, she asked if she could write a letter to her family. Not a goodbye letter, but a letter telling them how proud she was to die as a soldier. The old warrior finished his drink. That night, both prisoners attempted to escape. Not to save their lives, but to return to the battle. They had fashioned weapons from pieces of their cell and were planning to attack our guards. Did they? Escape? No. But they killed 2 of my soldiers before we stopped them. Chen was recaptured, but Martinez fought until we had to kill her. Her last words were, "Tell Colonel Davis we're still in the fight." Zektar stood up to leave. The siege ended when reinforcements arrived to relieve the human garrison. After 6 months, we had lost over 4,000 soldiers trying to capture 3,000 humans. But you had superior numbers and weapons. But we did not have their will to fight. Every day we grew weaker from the stress of battle. Every day they grew stronger from the same stress. It was like they fed on conflict itself. The commander walked toward the door. "Tomorrow night, I will tell you about Titan's Gate. I will. Tell you about General Patricia Brooks and her soldiers who made a fortress world into their home. I will tell you why we started having nightmares about human laughter echoing through volcanic caves." He paused at the door. "But I warn you again, young reporter. What I tell you tomorrow will be the worst part of all. Because at Titan's Gate, we learn that humans do not just survive in hell, they thrive in it." With those words, the old commander disappeared into the night, leaving Velos alone with the growing realization that her people had fought something far more terrifying than any army. On the 4th night, Velos found Commander Zektar drinking heavily before she even arrived. 3 empty bottles sat on his table, and his 4 hands could barely hold his glass steady. His black eyes were red around the edges, and he kept looking over his shoulder like he expected something terrible to appear. "Commander Velos," said softly as she sat down, "are you all right?" "All right," Zektar laughed, but the sound was broken and bitter. "No, young reporter. I have not been all right since Titan's Gate. None of us who served there have been all right." He gestured for another bottle and began speaking before it arrived. "Tonight I tell you about the fortress world of Titan's Gate. Tonight I tell you about General Patricia Brooks and her soldiers who turned hell itself into their home." The old warrior drank deeply. High Command was angry after Beta Centauri. They said I was becoming soft, that I was letting humans affect my judgment. They gave me command of the largest assault force in Catharian history, 50,000 soldiers, 200 ships, and orders to crush human resistance once and for all. "Where was this battle fought?" Velos asked. Titan's Gate was a fortress world at the edge of human space. The planet was a nightmare of active volcanoes, poisonous atmosphere, and temperatures that could melt our armor. No rational species would try to live there, let alone fight there. Zektar's voice became darker. But humans had built military bases all across that hellish world. They lived in places where the air itself was toxic, where the ground was hot enough to cook flesh, where poisonous gases erupted from the earth without warning. Could they survive in such conditions? That is what we asked ourselves. Environmental suits could only function for a few hours in those conditions. Our vehicles overheated and broke down. Our weapons malfunctioned from the extreme heat and chemical exposure. The commander leaned forward, but the humans thrived there. They had modified their equipment to work in those conditions. More importantly, they'd learned to use the hostile environment as a weapon against us. How did they do that, Captain? Steve Murphy commanded a forward base built inside an active volcanic region. The temperatures there reached over 200 degrees during the day. Our scouts could only approach wearing full environmental suits that limited their movement and vision. Zektar shook his head in amazement. Murphy's soldiers wore light clothing and moved freely through terrain that killed our troops in minutes. They had somehow adapted their bodies to function in conditions that should have been impossible for any organic life. Their bodies adapted. I do not understand how, but yes. Lieutenant Nina Patel led reconnaissance missions through areas where sulfur gas was so thick it would blind and choke our soldiers instantly. She breathed that poisonous air like it was nothing. The old commander ordered another drink. The worst discovery came when we realized that humans were deliberately seeking out the most dangerous assignments, where other species would rotate. Troops to prevent breakdown. Humans competed for the chance to serve in the most hostile areas. They wanted to be in dangerous places. Gunnery Sergeant Frank Torres volunteered for every mission into the volcanic zones. Combat Engineer Kelly O'Brien requested transfer to the most toxic areas of the planet. They acted like extreme danger was a privilege, not a punishment. Zektar's voice became very quiet. After 1 week of fighting, our psychological warfare, specialists intercepted human communications. They expected to find evidence of fear, desperation, or requests for evacuation. What did they find instead? They found humans making jokes about the conditions. They found soldiers betting on which volcanic eruption would be the biggest. They found engineers discussing how to modify their weapons to work even better in the extreme heat. The commander laughed bitterly. One intercepted message from communications specialist Greg Thompson became famous throughout our entire fleet. He sent a message to his unit saying, "Enemies bringing everything they've got tomorrow. The volcano's acting up, the air's extra poisonous today, and it's hot enough to melt steel. This is going to be fun." He thought it was fun. That was the word he used. Fun. While our soldiers were dying from environmental exposure, the humans were treating the entire war like some kind of extreme sport. Zektar stood up and walked to the window. The breakthrough came when we captured a human field manual that had been modified for operations on Titan's Gate. The changes they had made to standard military procedures were beyond our understanding. What kind of changes? They developed tactics that used volcanic eruptions as artillery support. They had learned to predict gas emissions and use them to create smokescreens. They had figured out how to channel lava flows to block our advance routes. The commander returned to his seat. But the most disturbing section was about personnel. Management, as the manual said, that soldiers who served on Titan's Gate for more than 6 months showed improved performance in all combat situations. Improved performance in hell? According to their own records, yes. Soldiers who survived the extreme conditions of Titan's Gate became more confident, more creative, and more effective in combat. The planet was not breaking them down. It was making them stronger. Zektar's 4 hands were shaking again. We started calling it the Human Forge, like they had found a way to use suffering to improve themselves. Every hardship, every danger, every impossible condition just made them more dangerous. Did you report this to your commanders? I tried, but they did not believe me. They said environmental conditions affect all species the same way. They said I was attributing supernatural powers to humans. The old warrior drank deeply, and we discovered the human rotation system, and everything became clear. Most species rotate troops out of combat zones to prevent psychological breakdown. The humans did the opposite. What do you mean? Soldiers who performed well in extreme conditions were kept there longer. Soldiers who adapted best to impossible environments were promoted and given more responsibility. They were rewarding troops for thriving in hell. Zektar's voice became very quiet. Major Sam Rodriguez had been stationed on Titan's Gate for 18 months when we encountered his unit. By all rational standards, he should have been a broken, exhausted shell of a soldier.
Ow.
He was not. He was the most effective combat commander I had ever faced. His troops moved through volcanic terrain like they had been born there. They used environmental hazards like precision weapons. They fought like the entire hellish planet was their personal domain. The commander stared into his drink.
Ow.
One engagement, Rodriguez's unit was caught in a massive volcanic eruption. Lava flows cut off their escape routes, toxic gases filled the air, and burning ash rained down like snow. What did they do? They used the eruption as cover for a counterattack. While our forces were taking shelter from the environmental disaster, Rodriguez led his soldiers directly through the lava field to attack our rear positions. Zektar's voice was barely above a whisper now. I watched human soldiers run across ground that was literally on fire. I saw them breathe air that would have killed any other species instantly. I watched them laugh while volcanic ash burned their skin. They were laughing. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos was recorded on our surveillance equipment during that battle. She was covered in burns from the volcanic ash. Her equipment was melting from the heat. and she was charging directly at our heaviest fortifications. The old commander looked directly at Velos. You know what she was shouting as she ran through literal hellfire? Shook her head. She was shouting, "Come on, boys. This is what we trained for. Let's show these bugs how humans party." Then she threw grenades at our positions while lava was flowing around her feet. Zektar finished his drink and stood up. That night, I sent my final report about human capabilities to High Command. I told them that humans had found a way to transform suffering into strength, fear into fury, and hell into home. Did they finally believe you? They relieved me of command. They said I was having a nervous breakdown and needed psychiatric evaluation. They sent me back to the homeworld for treatment. The commander walked toward the door. 3 months later, the war ended. Not because we won, but because High Command finally understood what I had been trying to tell them. He stopped at the door and turned back. Tomorrow night I will tell you about the final battle above Earth itself. I will tell you about Admiral Jonathan Pierce, and the moment when our entire empire realized what kind of species we had been fighting. Zektar's voice became very quiet. Tomorrow night I will tell you why we stopped fighting humans, not because we could not win, but because we realized that victory against such creatures would destroy everything we were. With those words, the old commander disappeared into the night, leaving Velos alone with the terrifying knowledge that humans had somehow learned to thrive in conditions that would kill any other species in the galaxy. On the 5th night, Velos arrived to find the cantina almost empty. Commander Zektar sat alone in his corner, but tonight he was not drinking. His forehands rested flat on the table, and his black eyes stared at nothing. He looked like a creature who had seen the end of the world. "Commander," Velos said as she approached, "you are not drinking tonight?" "No," Zektar replied without looking at her. "Tonight I need a clear mind. Tonight I tell you about the battle that ended everything. Tonight I tell you why the Catherian Empire surrendered to a species we could have crushed." Sat down and activated her recording device. What happened after Titan's Gate? After they relieved me of command, I was sent home for psychiatric treatment. But 6 months later, High Command called me back to active duty. The war was going badly. Human forces were pushing into our territory. They needed experienced commanders, even ones they thought were crazy. Zektar finally looked at her. Gave me command of a small squadron in the final assault on Earth itself, the human homeworld. High Command believed that threatening their birth planet would force them to negotiate. That seems like a logical strategy. Logic. Yes, we always believed in logic. We thought that all species valued survival above everything else. We thought that threatening their families and children would break their will to fight. The old commander stood up and walked to the window. Admiral Jonathan Pierce commanded the last human fleet above Earth, maybe 40 ships against our armada of 300. By every military calculation, it should have been a massacre. What happened? Pierce sent us a message before the battle began. I will never forget his voice, calm, almost cheerful. Said, "This is Admiral Pierce to all Catherian vessels. Welcome to our neighborhood. Let's show you how we settle disputes here." Zektar's voice became darker. Then the human fleet accelerated directly at us. Not tactical maneuvers, not careful positioning, full speed, straight into our formation. Like they wanted to turn the battle into hand-to-hand combat in space. That sounds like suicide. That is what we thought. Pierce had turned every human ship into a weapon. They used ramming attacks, close-range torpedo strikes, and boarding actions. Captain Roy Jackson drove his destroyer directly into one of our battleships and detonated his reactor. The commander returned to his seat. Commander Beth Sullivan took her cruiser on a suicide run through our carrier group. She destroyed 3 ships before her own was blown apart. Here's the terrifying part. What? She was laughing while she did it. Our communications intercepted her final transmission. She was telling her crew jokes as they flew directly into our guns. Her last words were, "See you boys in the next life. Save some aliens for me to shoot." Zektar's 4 hands clenched into fists. But the real horror began when human boarding parties reached our ships. Marines like Sergeant First Class Joe Martinez and Corporal Diane Foster had turned close combat into an art form. How so? They did not just try to capture our ships, They turned our own vessels into weapons against us. They would take control of our engineering sections and overload our reactors. They would reprogram our computers to fire on other Catherian ships. The old warrior's voice became very quiet. I watched Martinez lead a boarding party onto one of our dreadnoughts. His team was outnumbered 10-1, but they moved through our ship like they owned it. They knew exactly where to hit us to cause maximum damage. How could they know your ship designs? Because they had been studying us from the very beginning. Every battle, every engagement, every prisoner they took was a learning experience. They had been analyzing our weaknesses for 3 years. Zektar stood up again and began pacing. But the worst discovery came when we intercepted communications from the Earth's surface. We expected to hear panic, evacuation orders, desperate pleas for their fleet to protect them. What did you hear instead? We heard children being trained for combat. Schools had been converted into military training centers. Teachers like Colonel Mary Johnson were showing 10-year-old humans how to use weapons and explosives. The commander stopped pacing and stared at Velas. The humans were preparing their children to continue the fight if their fleet was destroyed, not as a last resort, but as part of their standard war planning. Children soldiers, not soldiers. Yet, but future soldiers. They were teaching their young that fighting invaders was not just a duty, but an honor. These children were excited about the possibility of defending their world. Zektar sat down heavily. One intercepted transmission still haunts my dreams. A human mother was talking to her 8-year-old daughter. She said, "Remember what Mommy taught you about the bad aliens, sweetie. If they come to our house, you know what to do with the special button, right? Special button?" Every human civilian had been given explosive devices to use against occupying forces. Not just the adults, but the children too. They had turned their entire population into a weapon. The old commander's voice became barely audible. That was when our leadership finally understood what we were fighting. We were not fighting an army or even a nation. We were fighting an entire species that had devoted itself completely to warfare. What do you mean? Every human, from the oldest veteran to the youngest child, was part of their war machine. They had no civilians, no non-combatants, no innocent bystanders. Every single human was prepared to kill and die for their species. Zektar looked directly at her. You understand what that means? Could never truly defeat them? Even if we killed 90% of their population, the remaining 10% would continue fighting. Even if we occupied their worlds, every human we left alive would be plotting against us. So you stopped fighting? High Command made the only rational decision. We opened negotiations for peace. Not because we could not win the war, but because we realized what winning would cost us. The commander's voice became very quiet. To truly defeat humans, we would have to kill every single one of them. Men, women, children, elderly, everyone. We would have to commit complete genocide, and you could not do that. We could have done it. We had the weapons, the ships, the capability, but our intelligence analysts made a terrifying discovery about human nature. Zektar leaned forward.
Hey.
They discovered that humans become more dangerous when they are losing. Every defeat made them more creative, more desperate, more willing. To use extreme tactics, genocide would not make them surrender. It would make them into something even worse. What could be worse than what you already faced? Humans with nothing left to lose. Our analysts calculated that a genocide attempt would turn every surviving human into a fanatic dedicated to revenge. They would spend generations developing new weapons, new tactics, new ways to hurt us. The old warrior finished his story. So, we made peace. Not because we respected humans, but because we feared what they would become if we pushed them to the edge of extinction. You feared them? Yes. For the first time in our history, the Catherian Empire was afraid. We had discovered a species that treated war not as politics, but as a way of life. They did not just fight to win. They fought because fighting was what made them human. Zektar stood up to leave for the final time. Every other species in the galaxy fights to live. Humans are the only ones who live to fight. They do not see warfare as a necessary evil. They see it as their greatest achievement. What does that mean for the future? It means that humans will spread across the galaxy. And wherever they go, they will be the most dangerous predators that universe has ever seen. It means that any species foolish enough to threaten them will learn the same lesson we did. The old commander walked toward the door. It means that humanity has found their true calling among the stars. They are not explorers or traders or diplomats. They are warriors. The galaxy will never be the same. He paused at the door one final time. Remember the story, young reporter? Tell your people what I have told you, because someday they may need to know what humans really are. And that knowledge might save their lives. With those words, Commander Zektar disappeared into the night, leaving Velos alone with the terrible truth about humanity's place in the galaxy.